The grand ballroom of the Riverside Hotel sparkled under dozens of crystal chandeliers. Tonight was different from the usual Friday evening service. Marcus Wellington, a real estate mogul worth millions, had rented the entire venue for his daughter's engagement party. Emma Chen wiped down the silverware at her station, trying to stay invisible among the wealthy guests in their designer gowns and tailored suits. She had been working at the Riverside Hotel for 3 years now, ever since she dropped out of the music conservatory. The memory still stung like a fresh wound. Her father's medical bills had piled up faster than she could count, and someone had to take care of her younger brother. The scholarship that once seemed like her golden ticket to a concert pianist career became just another dream she had to pack away. Emma adjusted her black vest and smoothed down her white shirt. Her manager, Mrs. Patterson, had warned all the staff to be on their best behavior tonight. Marcus Wellington was known for his impossible standards and quick temper. Just last month, he had gotten a chef fired at another restaurant for serving his steak medium instead of medium rare. The guests began flowing into the dining area like a river of expensive perfume and confident laughter. Emma carried trays of champagne glasses. Weaving between conversations about stock markets and vacation homes in the Hamptons, she had learned to tune out most of it. These people lived in a different world. One where a single watch on their wrist could pay for her father's entire surgery. Marcus Wellington stood near the center of the room, his silver hair perfectly styled. His navy suit probably costing more than Emma made in 6 months. His daughter, Victoria, clung to her fiancé's arm, showing off an engagement ring that caught the light like a small sun. Emma tried not to stare as she refilled water glasses at nearby tables. The evening rolled on smoothly until dessert service. A grand piano sat in the corner of the ballroom, polished to perfection but silent. It was part of the hotel's decor, rarely used except for the occasional jazz night on Wednesdays. Emma had walked past it thousands of times, each time feeling a small ache in her chest. Marcus Wellington's voice suddenly cut through the dinner conversations like a knife. He was speaking to someone near the piano, his tone loud enough to draw attention. Emma glanced over while clearing plates from table 7. A young man in a black tuxedo stood nervously beside the piano, his face pale. The young man was supposed to be the evening's entertainment, a pianist hired to play during dessert. But something had gone terribly wrong. Emma moved closer, pretending to arrange empty champagne bottles on her tray while listening. Marcus's voice dripped with disappointment and anger. The pianist had apparently injured his hand in a car accident that afternoon but had come anyway, hoping he could manage. He had just confessed he couldn't perform. The hotel manager rushed over, apologizing profusely, promising to find a solution. But Marcus wasn't interested in apologies. Emma's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold. She knew every song on that piano's sheet music stand. She had memorized them months ago during slow afternoons when she would dust around the instrument, her fingers sometimes ghosting over the keys when no one was watching. Marcus Wellington turned to address the entire room, his voice booming with theatrical frustration. He announced that the pianist had failed them, that the evening's carefully planned entertainment was ruined. Then, his eyes swept across the staff members standing along the walls. A cruel smile played at the corners of his mouth. What happened next would replay in Emma's mind for years to come. Marcus pointed at the waiters and waitresses, his gesture almost mocking. He declared that surely one of the help must have some hidden talent. After all, they were always so eager to serve. Perhaps one of them could save the evening. His tone made it clear he thought it was impossible, that he was making a joke at their expense. The other guests laughed uncomfortably. Some looked away, embarrassed by Marcus's behavior. Victoria tugged at her father's sleeve, whispering for him to stop, but he brushed her off. He was enjoying himself now, feeding off the discomfort in the room. Emma felt her coworker, James, tense beside her. He muttered under his breath about rich people and their games. Mrs. Patterson stood frozen near the kitchen doors, clearly calculating whether to intervene or stay silent to keep her job. Marcus continued his challenge, offering $1,000 to any staff member who could play just one song competently on that piano. He leaned against the instrument, his posture radiating confidence that no one would dare accept. The room fell into an awkward silence, broken only by the clinking of a fork against a plate somewhere in the back. Emma's hands trembled as she set down her tray. 3 years of biting her tongue. 3 years of swallowing her pride while serving people who looked through her like she was furniture. 3 years of walking past that piano, remembering everything she had sacrificed. Her feet moved before her brain could stop them. She stepped forward from her position along the wall, her sensible black shoes clicking against the marble floor. Every eye in the room turned toward her. Marcus Wellington's eyebrows rose in surprise, then amusement. Mrs. Patterson made a small sound of alarm, but Emma didn't look back. She could feel her father's medical bills pressing on her shoulders. Her brother's school fees, the rent that was due next week. But something else pushed her forward too, something that had been buried but never dead. Her love for music, her need to prove, if only to herself, that she was more than just a waitress in a vest. She stopped 3 feet from Marcus Wellington, her chin raised higher than it had been in years. Her voice came out steady, surprising even herself. She told him she would accept his challenge. The room erupted in whispers. Marcus's smile widened, clearly delighted by this unexpected entertainment. He stepped aside from the piano with an exaggerated bow, gesturing for her to proceed. Emma approached the piano bench, her heart hammering so hard she thought everyone must hear it. She hadn't played in front of anyone since her final recital at the conservatory, the one before she withdrew. Her fingers felt strange and unfamiliar as she lifted them toward the keys, like greeting old friends after a long absence. Emma sat on the piano bench, and the leather felt both foreign and familiar beneath her. She could feel Marcus Wellington's eyes on her back, could sense his anticipation of her failure. The entire room had gone silent in a way that made her ears ring. She placed her fingers on the keys, and the cool ivory sent a shock of memory through her entire body. For a moment, she was 20 years old again, sitting in the practice rooms at the conservatory, playing until her fingers ached. She remembered Professor Hartman standing over her shoulder, nodding with approval. She remembered the day she received her scholarship letter, how she had cried with joy in her mother's arms. Then she remembered the day everything changed, when her father collapsed at work. When the hospital bills started arriving. When her dreams began slipping away like sand through her fingers. Emma took a deep breath and chose her piece. Not something simple to play it safe. Not something easy that would barely satisfy Marcus's cruel challenge. She chose Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9. Number 2. It was the piece she had planned to perform at her graduation recital. The one she never got to play for an audience. Her fingers found the opening notes, and the first sounds that emerged from the piano were tentative, almost questioning. But then something clicked inside her. Muscle memory took over, and suddenly she wasn't in the Riverside Hotel ballroom anymore. She was back in the conservatory. Back in the practice room where she had spent countless hours. Back in the space where she had been truly herself. The melody flowed from her fingers like water, finding its course after a long drought. Her hands moved across the keys with a grace that came from years of training, from 10,000 hours of practice, from a passion that had never really died despite being buried under bills and exhaustion and compromise. The notes filled the ballroom, soft at first, then growing in confidence and power. Emma's eyes closed as she played, and she forgot about Marcus Wellington. She forgot about the expensive guests in their designer clothes. She forgot about the dirty dishes waiting in the kitchen and the tips she needed to count at the end of the night. For these precious minutes, she was just a musician again, speaking the only language that had ever made complete sense to her. The Chopin piece required both technical skill and emotional depth. The right hand carried the melody, singing and lyrical, while the left hand provided a steady, almost hypnotic accompaniment. Emma's fingers danced between the two voices, balancing them perfectly. When the piece called for softness, her touch was featherlight. When it demanded passion, her whole body leaned into the keys. She navigated the difficult middle section where the melody climbed higher and the rhythm became more complex. Her years of training showed in every phrase, every carefully controlled dynamic change. This wasn't the playing of an amateur who had learned a few songs. This was the work of someone who had dedicated their life to mastering an art form. The room had disappeared for Emma, but it was very much present for everyone else. Guests who had been laughing and chatting moments before sat frozen, champagne glasses halfway to their lips. Victoria Wellington had tears forming in her eyes, moved by the unexpected beauty unfolding before her. Even the other staff members who had worked with Emma for years stood in shock, never suspecting that their quiet co-worker carried such talent inside her. Marcus Wellington's face had transformed completely. The mocking smile had vanished. His arms, which had been crossed in amused skepticism, now hung at his sides. He stared at Emma as if seeing her for the first time, which in many ways he was. His expression shifted from surprise to something deeper: recognition, perhaps, or shame, or the uncomfortable realization that he had made a terrible mistake in his assumptions. Emma moved into the final section of the nocturne, where Chopin's genius truly shone. The melody became more ornate, decorated with delicate trills and runs. Her fingers moved with impossible speed and precision, yet the music never lost its singing quality. She shaped each phrase with the care of someone crafting something precious, because to her, it was precious. This was her voice, the one she had been forced to silence. As she played the final measures, allowing the last notes to fade into silence, Emma finally opened her eyes. The spell broke, and reality came rushing back. She was just a waitress again, sitting at a piano in her work uniform, before an audience that probably pitied her. She lifted her hands from the keys and placed them in her lap, not daring to turn around. The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but felt like an eternity. Then, from the back of the room, someone began clapping. The sound was joined by another, then another, until the entire ballroom erupted in applause. It wasn't polite applause or obligatory appreciation. It was genuine, thunderous, the kind of ovation usually reserved for concert halls and professional performances. Emma slowly turned on the piano bench. Her face flushed. The standing ovation continued, and she saw things she never expected. Victoria Wellington was openly crying, clutching her fiancé's hand. Several older guests had expressions of wonder on their faces. Mrs. Patterson looked torn between pride and worry about what this might mean for Emma's job. But it was Marcus Wellington's face that caught Emma's attention. The powerful real estate mogul who had issued the challenge as a joke now looked completely undone. He stepped forward, and for a moment Emma feared he would be angry that she had embarrassed him. Instead, he did something that shocked her even more than the applause. He extended his hand to her, not in the way a wealthy man might condescend to acknowledge a servant, but as an equal. His voice, when he spoke, had lost all its earlier mockery. He told her that in all his years of attending concerts and performances, he had rarely heard anything so moving. He asked her where she had trained, who her teachers were, why she was working as a waitress instead of performing. Emma shook his hand because it seemed rude not to, but she found herself at a loss for words. How could she explain her life to someone like him? How could she make him understand the choice between dreams and survival? She mumbled something about circumstances and family obligations, her voice barely audible over the continuing applause. Other guests approached, introducing themselves, asking questions. A woman in a diamond necklace mentioned she was on the board of the city's symphony orchestra. A distinguished older man handed her a business card, saying he managed several concert pianists. Emma took the cards with trembling hands, unable to process what was happening. James, her co-worker, caught her eye from across the room and gave her a subtle thumbs up. Even Mrs. Patterson seemed to have softened her usual stern expression, replaced with something almost maternal. The injured pianist who had started this whole chain of events stood in the corner, smiling with genuine warmth rather than jealousy. Marcus Wellington wasn't finished. He raised his hand to quiet the room, and his guests settled back into their seats. He announced that Emma had more than earned the $1,000 he had offered. Then, in a gesture that seemed to surprise even himself, he said he wanted to do more. He asked Emma if she would consider performing at his daughter's wedding in 3 months. He offered to pay her $10,000 for a 30-minute performance. The number hit Emma like a physical blow. $10,000. That would cover the remaining balance on her father's medical bills. That would give her brother enough for his first year of college. That would be a cushion, a safety net, a chance to breathe for the first time in 3 years. Emma stood frozen beside the piano, Marcus Wellington's offer hanging in the air like something fragile and impossible. $10,000 for a single performance. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab this opportunity with both hands. Another part whispered warnings about strings attached, about the dangers of accepting charity disguised as opportunity. Before she could form a response, Victoria Wellington rushed forward, her engagement ring flashing as she grabbed Emma's hands. The young woman's eyes were still wet with tears, and her voice trembled with emotion. She told Emma that she had never heard anything so beautiful, that it would be an honor to have her play at the wedding. There was no condescension in Victoria's voice, only genuine admiration and something that looked like gratitude. Marcus watched his daughter, and something in his expression shifted again. Perhaps he saw Emma differently now that Victoria had embraced her so warmly. Perhaps the reality of Emma's talent had finally penetrated his assumptions about class and worth. He told Emma she should think about the offer, that she didn't need to answer tonight. He pulled out his personal business card and pressed it into her hand. The rest of the evening passed in a blur for Emma. She returned to work, clearing plates and refilling drinks, but everything felt surreal now. Guests who had previously looked through her now smiled and nodded. A few even stopped her. To compliment her playing again, Mrs. Patterson kept watching her with an expression Emma couldn't quite read, part concern, part calculation, as if trying to figure out whether she was about to lose her best waitress. When the party finally ended around midnight, Emma helped with the cleanup in a daze. James kept trying to catch her attention, bursting with questions, but she could barely focus on his excited chatter. She kept touching the business card in her pocket, making sure it was real, that this whole night hadn't been some exhausted hallucination. The night manager called her into the office before she left. Emma's heart sank, wondering if she was in trouble for stepping out of line, for making a scene. But instead, the manager told her that Marcus Wellington had insisted on giving her the $1,000 cash immediately. He handed her an envelope, thick with bills. Emma stared at it, her hands shaking as she took it. She walked to the bus stop in the cold early morning air, the envelope heavy in her bag. The streets were empty, except for a few delivery trucks and one homeless man sleeping in a doorway. Emma waited under the flickering streetlight, her mind racing with impossible thoughts. What if she said yes to the wedding performance? What if this was her chance to return to music, even in some small way? But reality crept back in as the bus arrived and she climbed aboard. She had to work a double shift tomorrow. Her father had a doctor's appointment on Tuesday that he couldn't miss. Her brother needed new textbooks for his classes. The conservatory felt like another lifetime ago, and she wasn't that girl anymore. She was a waitress who happened to remember how to play piano, nothing more. When Emma finally got home to the small two-bedroom apartment she shared with her father and brother, the sun was just starting to lighten the sky. She kicked off her shoes at the door, trying to be quiet. But her father was awake, sitting in his chair by the window, the oxygen tank beside him humming softly. He looked at her with those eyes that still saw her as his little girl. Even though she was 23 now and carrying the weight of the family on her shoulders. He asked about work, and Emma meant to just say it was fine, like always. But instead, she sat on the floor beside his chair and told him everything. The challenge, the performance, Marcus Wellington's offer, all of it. Her father listened without interrupting, his weathered hand resting on her head like he used to do when she was small. When she finished, tears were running down both their faces. He told her he was proud of her, that he had always been proud, that he was sorry she had to give up her dreams for him. Emma tried to tell him it wasn't his fault, that she didn't regret her choice, but her voice broke on the words. They sat in silence as the sun rose, the city beginning to wake up around them. Her father finally spoke, his voice raspy from the oxygen. He told her she should accept Marcus Wellington's offer. He said she should take every opportunity to play, to share her gift, because talent like hers was too rare to waste. Emma protested, listing all the reasons it was too risky, too uncertain, But her father was insistent. The next few days passed in a strange fog. Emma went to work, served meals, smiled at customers, but part of her mind was somewhere else. She kept pulling out Marcus Wellington's business card, staring at the embossed lettering, wondering what she should do. The $1,000 cash sat in an envelope under her mattress, and she had counted it 3 times to make sure it was real. On Wednesday evening, Emma found herself at the hotel early for her shift. The ballroom was empty, except for the cleaning crew. Without really meaning to, she walked over to the piano. The lid was closed, and she could see her reflection in the polished wood. She looked tired, she realized. Not just physically tired, but something deeper. Something that had been slowly draining away over the past 3 years. Mrs. Patterson found her there, standing by the piano like a ghost haunting her past life. The older woman studied Emma for a long moment before speaking. She said she had been managing this hotel for 23 years, and she had seen a lot of people pass through. She had never seen anyone with Emma's talent, not among the guests, not among the expensive entertainment they hired. She told Emma that it would be a crime to let that talent die in this place. Emma felt defensive. She said she was grateful for the job, that working here had saved her family. Mrs. Patterson softened her tone. She wasn't criticizing Emma's choices, she said. She was just pointing out that sometimes life offers second chances, and it takes courage to grab them. Then she did something surprising. She told Emma she could use the piano to practice whenever it wasn't needed. Early mornings or late nights when the ballroom was empty. That night, after her shift, Emma stayed behind. She sat at the piano in the empty ballroom, the chandeliers dimmed to just enough light to see the keys. Her fingers found the familiar patterns, and she began to play. Not Chopin this time, but something she had composed herself years ago, during her last semester at the conservatory. The notes came back to her slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. She played for an hour, maybe 2. Lost in the music, she didn't hear the door open, didn't notice she had an audience until she finished the piece. When she finally looked up, a man stood at the entrance to the ballroom. He was maybe 50, with silver-rimmed glasses and a kind face. Emma's heart jumped. She thought she was in trouble for being there after hours, but the man smiled and introduced himself. His name was David Chono relation. Just a coincidence. He explained that he had been attending a late business dinner in the hotel restaurant when he heard piano music. He had followed the sound out of curiosity. Then he asked Emma a question that would change everything. Was she a professional pianist? Emma almost laughed at the irony. She explained her situation, the conservatory, dropping out, working as a waitress. David listened intently, nodding occasionally. When she finished, he pulled out his own business card. He was a talent manager, he explained, specializing in classical musicians. He had clients who performed at Carnegie Hall, at concert venues across the country and around the world. David Chen sat down on one of the ballroom chairs, crossing his legs and studying Emma with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. He told her he had been in the music business for 25 years, and in that time, he had heard thousands of pianists. Most were technically proficient, but emotionally empty. Some had passion, but lacked discipline. Very rarely, he found someone who had both, someone who could make even an empty hotel ballroom feel like a sacred space. Emma, he said, was one of those rare people. She didn't know how to respond to such praise. She stammered something about being rusty, about not having played seriously in years. David waved away her protests. Rust could be polished off, he said. What she had, that core of genuine artistry, couldn't be taught. It was either there or it wasn't, and she had it in abundance. He asked her if she would consider auditioning for him, performing a full recital so he could hear her range and depth. Emma's first instinct was to say no. The idea seemed absurd, like a fantasy that would crumble the moment she reached for it. She explained about her father, her brother, the bills that never stopped coming. She couldn't risk the stable income from waitressing for something as uncertain as a music career. David listened without interrupting, his expression thoughtful. When she finished listing all the reasons why his offer was impossible, he asked her a simple question. What if it wasn't as risky as she thought? He explained that he could arrange for her to perform at small venues initially. private events and intimate concerts where she could earn money while building a reputation. The PE wouldn't be huge at first, but it would be reliable, and it would grow as her reputation grew. He wouldn't ask her to quit her job immediately. She could transition gradually. Testing the waters before diving in completely. Emma felt tears threatening again. She was so tired of crying, but this man's kindness and belief in her felt overwhelming. She told him about Marcus Wellington's wedding offer, and David's eyes lit up. That was perfect, he said. A high-profile event with influential guests would be exactly the kind of exposure she needed. He could help her prepare, choose the right repertoire, present herself professionally. If she agreed to work with him, he would take no commission from the wedding payment. That money was hers to keep for her family. She asked him why he was being so generous, why he would invest time and energy in someone who might fail. David smiled and leaned back in his chair. He told her a story about his own sister, a brilliant violinist who had given up music to support her family 40 years ago. She had never returned to it, and she had died 5 years ago, with that regret still heavy in her heart. He had promised himself that if he ever found someone in a similar situation, someone with real talent being crushed by circumstances, he would do whatever he could to help them find another path. Emma sat silently, absorbing his words. The ballroom felt different now, charged with possibility instead of just memories. She thought about her father's words, about taking opportunities to play, about not letting her gift go to waste. She thought about the feeling of her fingers on the keys tonight, how alive she had felt, how much like herself. Finally, she nodded. Yes, she would do the audition. Yes, she would work with him. Yes, she would try. David's face broke into a genuine smile. He stood and shook her hand, professional now, already planning. They exchanged contact information, and he told her he would arrange the audition for next week at a small concert hall he had access to. He recommended she practice at least 2 hours daily if possible, working on a diverse repertoire that showcased different styles and periods. Then he left, and Emma was alone in the ballroom again. She looked at the piano, this instrument that had been silent in her life for so long. She sat back down and played one more piece before leaving Bach's Prelude in C major from the Well-Tempered. It was the first piece she had ever learned at the conservatory, simple but profound. As her fingers moved through the familiar patterns, she felt something shift inside her. Fear was still there, and uncertainty, and worry about all the practical problems. But underneath it all was something she had almost forgotten. The next morning, Emma called Marcus Wellington's office. His secretary answered, and Emma almost hung up, suddenly terrified. But she forced herself to speak, leaving a message that she would be honored to perform at Victoria's wedding. The secretary sounded pleased, and said Mr. Wellington would be in touch soon to discuss details. Work that day was strange. Emma moved through her tasks mechanically, her mind full of music and possibilities. James noticed she was distracted, and asked if everything was okay. She wanted to tell him about David Chen, about the audition, about all of it. But something held her back. It felt too fragile still, too new. If she spoke about it out loud, it might disappear like morning mist. Marcus Wellington called her directly that evening. His voice on the phone was warmer than it had been at the party, less performative. He apologized for his behavior that night, for the way he had challenged the staff. He admitted he had been showing off for his guests, treating people like entertainment. Hearing her play had humbled him, he said, reminded him that talent and worth weren't connected to wealth or status. Emma didn't know what to say to that, so she simply thanked him. They discussed the wedding details. Victoria wanted Emma to play during the ceremony itself, and for 30 minutes during the cocktail hour afterward. Marcus asked if Emma needed anything access to a better piano for practice, particular sheet music, anything at all. Emma thought about asking for help, but decided against it. David Chen had already offered support, and she didn't want to feel indebted to Marcus Wellington more than necessary. Her father's next doctor appointment brought mixed news. The treatment was working, slowly, but he would need another procedure in 6 months. More bills, more expenses. Emma sat in the hospital waiting room, doing math in her head. The $1,000 from the engagement party was already allocated to existing debts. The $10,000 from the wedding would cover her father's upcoming procedure and leave a small cushion. But after that, she would be back to square one unless David Chun's plan worked out. The week before the audition passed in a blur of work and practice. Mrs. Patterson made good on her promise, letting Emma use the ballroom piano during off hours. Emma found herself coming in 2 hours before her shifts and staying an hour after, her fingers relearning their old skills. It was harder than she expected. Her technique had remained surprisingly solid, but her stamina was gone. After 45 minutes of playing, her hands would cramp and ache. She pushed through the pain, driven by something she couldn't quite name. It wasn't just about the money anymore, though that was certainly part of it. It was about reclaiming a piece of herself she thought had died. Every note she played felt like she was rebuilding something that had been broken, finding pieces she had scattered 3 years ago and carefully putting them back together. James finally cornered her one night after closing. He had watched her rushing to the piano every chance she got. Had seen the way she looked at the keys like they held answers to questions she hadn't asked. He told her he had done some research, that he knew how rare real talent was in classical music. He said he believed in her, that if she had a chance to do something more than serve drinks and clear plates, she should take it. His support meant more to Emma than she could express. The day of the audition arrived with grey skies and cold rain. Emma woke up at 5 in the morning. Her stomach twisted with nerves. She had barely slept, running through pieces in her mind, worrying about memory slips and wrong notes. Her father was already awake when she came into the kitchen, and he made her tea with steady hands despite his illness. He told her to breathe, to remember why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about perfection, he said. It was about truth. The concert hall David Chen had arranged was smaller than Emma expected, maybe 200 seats, but beautiful. Dark wood paneling, excellent acoustics, and a Steinway grand piano on stage that gleamed under the lights. David was already there, along with 2 other people he introduced as colleagues who helped him evaluate potential clients. They were kind but professional, making Emma feel both welcomed and scrutinized. Emma had prepared for pieces showcasing different styles and periods. She started with Bach, the same prelude she had played in the hotel ballroom. Her fingers felt stiff at first, mechanical, but gradually the music began to flow. The acoustics of the hall were extraordinary. Every note sang out clear and true, filling the space in a way the hotel piano never could. She finished the Bach and moved immediately into Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, first movement. The Beethoven was more emotional, more vulnerable. Emma closed her eyes and let herself feel the melancholy beauty of the piece. She thought about her mother, who had died when Emma was 16, who would have loved to see this moment. She thought about all the dreams deferred and the sacrifices made. The music became a conversation between who she had been and who she was becoming, between loss and hope. For her third piece, Emma chose Debussy's Clair de Lune. The impressionistic style required a different touch, more subtle and atmospheric. She had always loved Debussy's ability to paint pictures with sound, and she tried to bring that same quality to her performance. The notes floated through the hall like light on water, shimmering and translucent. She could feel the 3 listeners leaning forward, paying attention in a way that made her both proud and terrified. Her final piece was the Chopin Nocturne she had played at Marcus Wellington's party. This time, though, it felt different. She wasn't playing to prove herself or escape embarrassment. She was playing because she loved this music, because it meant something to her beyond survival or obligation. The performance wasn't technically perfect. She rushed slightly in one passage and missed an ornament in another, but it had heart, and she knew it. When the last notes faded, Emma lifted her hands from the keys and opened her eyes. David Chen was smiling, and his 2 colleagues were whispering to each other. The silence stretched for a few seconds before David stood and began clapping. The others joined him, and Emma felt relief flood through her. She had done it. She had proven, at least to herself, that she was still a musician. David invited her to sit with them in the audience. His colleagues introduced themselves properly. Jennifer, who specialized in publicity for classical artists, and Robert, who handled bookings and contracts. They asked Emma about her training, her influences, her goals. She answered honestly, not trying to hide her circumstances or pretend to be something she wasn't. If they wanted to work with her, she decided they needed to know exactly who she was. Jennifer was direct in her assessment. Emma had raw talent and obvious training, but she was rough around the edges. Her technique needed polishing, and she needed to rebuild her confidence. Jennifer suggested Emma might benefit from working with a coach, someone who could help her prepare for more demanding performances. The cost would be high, she warned. But David quickly interjected that he knew someone who might offer a reduced rate for a promising student. Robert talked about the practical side potential venues, the kind of events Emma could perform at initially, realistic fee expectations. He suggested starting with private house concerts for wealthy music lovers, corporate events, and small recitals at libraries and community centers. The income would be modest at first, maybe $2,000 to $3,000 per month if she could book 2 to 3 performances. It wasn't enough to quit her day job yet, but it was a start. David then laid out his vision more clearly. He wanted to work with Emma for at least a year, building her repertoire and reputation gradually. He would take a 15% commission on bookings he arranged, which was standard in the industry. He would help her create promotional materials, connect her with potential clients, and guide her career development. But he was clear about one thing: this would be hard work, and success wasn't guaranteed. Emma would need to practice daily, take lessons regularly, and perform as often as possible to improve. Emma listened to all of this, trying to process the information. It felt real in a way that both excited and scared her. This wasn't a fairy tale where her problems would magically disappear. This was a long, uncertain road with no promise of arrival. But it was a road, a path forward, which was more than she had yesterday. She agreed to David's terms. They drew up a simple contract right there. 1 year of representation with options to renew. Emma signed with shaking hands, wondering if her father would think she was crazy, if her brother would resent the time this would take away from the family. But she signed anyway, because sometimes you have to choose yourself, even when it feels selfish. The next 3 weeks were exhausting. Emma maintained her regular waitressing schedule while fitting in practice sessions wherever she could. David connected her with a piano teacher, Professor Margaret Lynn, who had taught at the conservatory before retiring. Professor Lynn was in her 70s, demanding but patient, and she agreed to teach Emma for a reduced rate after hearing her play. The lessons were humbling. Professor Lynn identified weaknesses in Emma's technique that needed correction: tension in her shoulders, inconsistent pedaling, a tendency to rush difficult passages. They worked on these issues methodically, sometimes spending entire lessons on just a few measures of music. Emma would leave the lessons frustrated but also energized, realizing how much she still had to learn. Marcus Wellington's assistant called to schedule a rehearsal at the wedding venue. Emma took a bus and 2 trains to reach the country club where the ceremony would be held. The ballroom was even more impressive than the Riverside Hotel. With floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking manicured gardens, the piano was a concert grand Steinway, perfectly maintained. Emma's heart raced when she saw it. Victoria Wellington was there for the rehearsal, along with her wedding planner and her fiancé, Thomas. Victoria greeted Emma warmly, hugging her like an old friend. She explained what she wanted: classical pieces for the ceremony, including Pockelbell's Canon in D for the processional. For the cocktail hour, she wanted a mix of romantic pieces, whatever Emma thought would fit the mood. Victoria gave Emma complete creative control, trusting her judgment. The rehearsal went well, though Emma felt the pressure of the upcoming performance weighing on her. This would be her highest profile event yet, and mistakes would be noticed. Victoria seemed to sense her nervousness and told her something that stuck with Emma. She said that, on her wedding day, she didn't want perfection. She wanted authenticity, someone playing from the heart. That, Victoria said, was what had moved her at the engagement party, and that was what she wanted again. David Chen called Emma 2 days before the wedding with unexpected news. One of the guests attending Victoria's wedding was Catherine Morrison, a prominent arts patron who sat on the boards of 3 major cultural institutions. David had learned through his contacts that Catherine was actively looking for fresh talent to feature at a fundraising gala she was planning for next spring. If Emma impressed her at the wedding, it could open significant doors. The pressure Emma already felt multiplied tenfold. She spent every free moment practicing, running through her planned repertoire until her fingers moved automatically. Professor Lin squeezed in an extra lesson, working with Emma on performance anxiety and stage presence. The professor shared her own stories of nerves before important concerts, normalizing Emma's fears while giving her practical techniques to manage them. The morning of the wedding arrived clear and beautiful. Emma's father insisted on coming with her, even though the trip would tire him. Her brother offered to drive them in their old car, which made alarming sounds but somehow kept running. Emma wore a simple black dress she had bought second-hand, the most formal thing she owned. She had tied her hair back in a neat bun, trying to look professional. When they arrived at the country club, Emma's father squeezed her hand before she got out of the car. He told her he loved her, that he was proud of her no matter what happened. Her brother gave her an awkward hug and made her promise to tell him everything later. Then they drove off to wait at a nearby coffee shop until the ceremony was over, and Emma walked into the venue alone. The ballroom was transformed with flowers and candles and white silk draped everywhere. The piano had been positioned perfectly, visible but not intrusive, near where the ceremony would take place. Emma sat down and ran through a few warm-up exercises, trying to calm her racing heart. Staff members rushed around with last-minute preparations, but no one bothered her. Marcus Wellington found her about 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to start. He looked different today, less commanding and more vulnerable. He thanked her for being there, for agreeing to do this for Victoria. Then he said something unexpected. He told her that watching her play at the engagement party had forced him to examine his own prejudices and assumptions. He had spent his whole life judging people by their bank accounts and social status, and it had made him cruel. He hoped he was becoming a better person, though he knew he still had a long way to go. Emma didn't know how to respond to such personal confession. She simply told him she hoped Victoria's wedding day would be beautiful. Marcus smiled and said he was certain it would be, now that Emma was there to provide the music. Then he left to attend to other duties, and Emma was alone with the piano again. The guests began arriving, filing into their seats in hushed, reverent tones. Emma recognized some faces from the engagement party, others were new. She spotted Catherine Morrison, immediately an elegant woman in her 60s with silver hair and impeccable posture. Sitting in the third row, Emma tried not to think about how much could hinge on the next few hours. The ceremony began with Emma playing Vivaldi's Spring from the Four Seasons. Her fingers found the notes cleanly, the joyful melody setting the perfect tone as guests settled and the wedding party assembled. She transitioned smoothly into Beethoven's Ode to Joy, arranged for solo piano, as the bridesmaids walked down the aisle. Each woman moved slowly, gracefully, and Emma matched her tempo to their steps. Then came the moment everyone waited for. The doors at the back of the ballroom opened, and Victoria appeared with her father. Emma began Pochabel's canon in D, the traditional processional that generations of brides had walked to. But Emma didn't play it traditionally. She added subtle variations, small ornamentations that made it fresh while honoring the familiar melody. Victoria's face lit up when she heard it, and Emma saw tears in the bride's eyes, even from across the room. Marcus Wellington walked his daughter down the aisle with tears streaming down his own face. Emma played, pouring every ounce of emotion into the music, thinking about fathers and daughters, about love and letting go, about the beautiful, painful passage of time. When Victoria reached the altar and Marcus handed her to Thomas, Emma brought the piece to a gentle close, the final notes hanging in the air like a blessing. The ceremony itself lasted about 20 minutes. Emma played softly during the reading of vows, background music that supported without overwhelming. When Victoria and Thomas were pronounced married and kissed for the first time as husband and wife, Emma launched into a joyful Mendelssohn's Wedding March, and the entire room erupted in applause and cheers. The cocktail hour began after the ceremony, and Emma transitioned into lighter, romantic pieces. She had prepared a medley that included Chopin waltzes, Schumann's Trauermarsch, and several jazz standards arranged in a classical style. Guests mingled with champagne glasses, their conversations creating a pleasant buzz of sound that blended with the music. Emma played for the full 30 minutes Marcus had requested. Then an additional 15 because Victoria asked her to keep going while they finished photographs. Her hands were starting to tire, but the adrenaline kept her going. She could see guests, occasionally glancing her way, some pausing their conversations to listen more closely to particular passages. When she finally finished and stood from the piano bench, several guests approached to compliment her. An older gentleman said her playing reminded him of concerts he had attended in Vienna. A younger woman asked if Emma gave lessons, saying her daughter was studying piano and needed inspiration. Emma accepted the compliments with grace, though internally she felt overwhelmed. Then Catherine Morrison appeared, and Emma's breath caught. The arts patron had an assessing look in her eyes, not unkind but thoroughly evaluating. She introduced herself and asked Emma about her background. Emma answered honestly, not hiding her current work as a waitress or her departure from the conservatory. Catherine listened without judgment, nodding occasionally. Finally, Catherine said she had been moved by Emma's playing, particularly the variations on Pockelbell's canon. She asked if Emma would be interested in performing at her fundraising gala in April. It would be a larger audience, about 500 people, and the pay would be $15,000 for a 1-hour performance. Emma's heart nearly stopped. She managed to say yes, that she would be honored. Catherine handed Emma her card and told her to have her manager contact her office next week to arrange details. She mentioned that several music critics would likely attend the gala, and a strong performance could lead to reviews and more opportunities. Then she moved away to speak with other guests, leaving Emma trembling with excitement and terror. David Chen had been right. This wedding was opening doors Emma hadn't even known existed. But with each new opportunity came new pressure, new expectations, new chances to fail spectacularly in front of people who mattered. Emma found a quiet corner and pulled out her phone to text her father and brother. She told them everything had gone well, that she would have stories to share. Marcus Wellington found Emma before she left the venue. He handed her an envelope that felt thick with cash, the $10,000 he had promised, plus an additional $2,000 as a tip for the extra playing time. He told her Victoria had cried during the ceremony, moved by the beauty of the music, and that it had made the day perfect. Emma thanked him, her voice catching with emotion. This money would change everything for her family, at least for the next few months. The drive home felt surreal. Emma sat in the back seat while her brother drove, her father in the passenger seat, turning around occasionally to smile at her. She told them about Catherine Morrison's offer, about the $15,000 gala performance. Her father's eyes filled with tears, but he was smiling. Her brother kept saying it was incredible, that she was going to be famous. Emma didn't feel like she was going to be famous. She felt exhausted and exhilarated and terrified all at once. When they got home, Emma counted out the money. $12,000 in cash, more money than she had held in her entire life. She gave her father $8,000 immediately, enough to schedule his upcoming procedure and pay down the medical debt that had been crushing them. She gave her brother $500 for textbooks and supplies. The rest she kept, knowing she would need it for lessons with Professor Lin, for a proper performance dress, for all the small expenses that would come with this new path. Monday morning, Emma called Mrs. Patterson and gave her 2 weeks' notice. It was one of the hardest conversations of her life. Mrs. Patterson had given her a job when she desperately needed one, had been fair if demanding, and had supported Emma's recent piano pursuits. The older woman was quiet for a long moment after Emma explained her decision. Then she said she had expected this call, that she was happy for Emma, and that the hotel would miss her. The next 2 weeks, Emma worked double dutiful, filling her remaining waitressing shifts while ramping up her practice schedule and taking daily lessons with Professor Lin. David Chen was working to book her first series of performances, starting with house concerts at the homes of wealthy music lovers. The fees were modest, $1,500 to $2,000 per concert, but they would provide steady income while she prepared for the bigger gala performance. Her first booked concert was at the home of Dr. Richard Santos, a retired surgeon who hosted monthly salon evenings for friends interested in classical music. The performance would be in his living room for about 30 guests. Emma was more nervous about this intimate setting than she had been about Victoria's wedding. At the wedding, she had been part of the background. At a house concert, she would be the sole focus. Professor Lin helped Emma prepare a program that balanced accessibility with sophistication. They included pieces that would engage listeners who weren't classical music experts, while still showcasing Emma's growing technical abilities. Schubert, Impromptu, a Chopin ballade, some Debussy, and ending with a Liszt Hungarian Rhapsody that would be both impressive and fun. The night of the house concert, Emma arrived early to familiarize herself with Dr. Santos's piano, beautiful Beisendorfer Grand that had belonged to his late wife, herself a pianist. The doctor was a kind man in his 70s who clearly loved music deeply. He told Emma that these salon evenings had helped him cope with his wife's death 3 years ago, keeping her memory and her love of music alive. The guests arrived, mostly older couples, but a few younger people as well. They settled into chairs arranged in the living room, drinks in hand, chatting quietly. Dr. Santos introduced Emma briefly, mentioning that she had recently returned to performing after time away. Then Emma sat at the piano, took a breath, and began to play. The intimate setting created a different energy than larger venues. Emma could see each person's face, could watch how they reacted to different passages. Some closed their eyes and swayed slightly. Others leaned forward, watching her hands. One older woman wiped tears during the Schubert. Emma felt connected to the audience in a way she never had before, as if they were all sharing this moment of beauty together, rather than her simply performing for them. When she finished the program, the applause was warm and genuine. Several guests approached her during the refreshment break that followed, asking questions and sharing their own musical experiences. A woman named Diane mentioned she was planning her mother's 80th birthday party and asked if Emma would be interested in performing. Emma exchanged contact information, letting David handle the booking later. These house concerts became Emma's bread and butter over the next 2 months. David booked her for 8 performances, each paying between $1,500 and $3,000. It wasn't the fortune Emma had imagined, but it was enough to live on, especially since she no longer needed to cover all her family's expenses alone. Her father's medical situation had stabilized with the procedure, and her brother had gotten a part-time job to help with household costs. The gala performance for Catherine Morrison loomed ahead, growing larger in Emma's mind with each passing week. Professor Lin intensified their lessons, pushing Emma harder than ever before. They worked on pieces that would show her range batch for technical precision, Rachmaninoff for romantic passion, contemporary composers to show she wasn't stuck in the past. The program needed to be perfect, memorable, the kind of performance that would establish Emma as a serious artist worth watching. Emma practiced 6 to 8 hours daily, stopping only when her hands cramped or her back ached from sitting. She was living the life she had dreamed of at the conservatory, but she was discovering it wasn't quite the fairy tale she had imagined. The constant practice was isolating. Her old friends from the hotel had their own lives, and she hadn't yet made friends in the classical music world. Some nights, she felt crushingly lonely, sitting at her keyboard in the apartment while her father slept and her brother studied. David checked in regularly, offering encouragement and practical advice. He warned Emma about the challenges ahead: the fierce competition, the difficulty of building a sustainable career, the reality that even talented musicians often struggled financially. But he also told her he believed in her potential, that he saw something special in her playing that went beyond technical skill. She had authenticity, he said, a quality that couldn't be faked or taught. 3 weeks before the gala, Emma received unexpected news. A music critic named Thomas Way had attended one of her house concerts and written about her on his blog. The review was glowing, calling her a rediscovered talent and praising her emotionally direct playing style. David was thrilled. This was the kind of publicity money couldn't buy. The blog post led to more booking inquiries, including a request from a small concert series at a public library. But the review also attracted negative attention. An anonymous commenter claimed Emma had fabricated her conservatory credentials. Another suggested she was only getting opportunities because of her sob story about financial hardship. The comments stung more than Emma wanted to admit. She had worked so hard, and now strangers were questioning her legitimacy, suggesting she didn't deserve her opportunities. Professor Lin found Emma crying during a lesson after reading the comments. The older woman let her student express her frustration and hurt, then shared her own experiences with criticism and doubt throughout her career. Every performer faced it, she said. The key was learning which criticism to listen to and which to ignore. Anonymous internet commenters had no stake in Emma's success. Their opinions were meaningless. What mattered was the work, the continuous improvement, the commitment to the music itself. The night of Catherine Morrison's fundraising gala arrived with spring rain drumming against windows. Emma stood backstage at the concert hall, a much larger venue than she had ever performed in. 500 people filled the seats, dressed in formal attire, having paid $200 per ticket to attend. The money raised would support music education programs for underprivileged children, which gave Emma's performance additional meaning and pressure. Catherine Morrison found Emma during the pre-performance reception, introducing her to several important guests. There was Gerald Wong, the principal conductor of the City Symphony Orchestra, Maria Castellanos, who reviewed classical concerts for the major newspaper, Dr. Helen Park, who directed the conservatory Emma had once attended. Emma shook hands and smiled and tried not to think about how her entire future might depend on the next hour. Dr. Park pulled Emma aside for a private moment. The conservatory director said she remembered Emma's audition years ago, remembered the promise she had shown. She asked why Emma had never reached out about returning to complete her degree. Emma explained about her father's illness, the financial pressures, the impossible choice she had faced. Dr. Park listened thoughtfully, then mentioned that the conservatory had expanded its scholarship programs and now offered more support for non-traditional students. It might be worth exploring, she said, if Emma was interested in completing her formal education. The possibility of returning to the conservatory had never occurred to Emma. She had closed that door in her mind so firmly that it hadn't occurred to her it might open. Again, Dr. Park handed her a card and told her to call when she was ready to discuss options. Then it was time for Emma to take the stage. The walk from backstage to the piano felt endless. Emma's legs trembled as she moved across the polished floor, aware of 500 pairs of eyes watching. The piano was a magnificent Steinway, perfectly maintained, the kind of instrument she had only dreamed of playing. She sat on the bench, adjusted her position, and placed her hands over the keys. For one terrible moment, Emma's mind went blank. She couldn't remember the opening notes of her first piece. Panic rose in her throat, and she could feel sweat forming on her palms. The silence stretched too long, and she heard someone in the audience shift uncomfortably. Then, like a gift, she remembered her father's words from the morning of David Chan's audition. Remember why you fell in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about perfection. It was about truth. Emma closed her eyes, took a breath, and began to play. She started with Bach's Prelude and Fugue in C-sharp major from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1. The mathematical precision of Bach's counterpoint required complete focus, leaving no room for nerves or Her fingers found their way through the complex interweaving voices, and the fear began to recede. This was what she knew how to do. This was who she was. The Bach flowed into Chopin's Bollard, No. 1 in G minor, a piece of sweeping romanticism and technical demands. Emma had chosen it specifically because it told a story, moving from mysterious opening through passionate climaxes to a powerful conclusion. She threw herself into the performance, no longer thinking about the critics or the conductor or the 500 people watching. She was simply a musician, sharing something beautiful with anyone willing to listen. She followed with Debussy's L'Île Joyeuse, letting the impressionistic cascades of notes paint pictures of joy and light. Then came Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, the famous Bells of Moscow, with its thundering bass notes and singing melodies. Emma played with power and passion, the kind of performance that made audiences hold their breath. For her final piece, Emma had chosen something unexpected, a contemporary work by an American composer named Jennifer Higg. It was a piece she had discovered during her practice sessions, full of angular melodies and complex harmonies that pushed boundaries while remaining accessible. She wanted to show she wasn't just a museum curator playing dead composers, that she engaged with living music and living composers. When the last notes of the Higdon piece faded, there was a moment of profound silence. Then the entire audience rose to their feet, applauding thunderously. Emma stood and bowed, overwhelmed by the response. She saw Catherine Morrison beaming, Gerald Wong applauding vigorously, Maria Castellanos taking notes, even while standing. The ovation continued for what felt like minutes, and Emma bowed again, tears streaming down her face. Backstage afterward, Emma was surrounded by Gerald Wong told her he would like to discuss the possibility of her performing as a soloist with the symphony orchestra next season. Maria Castellanos said her review would run in Sunday's paper, and asked for a few quotes. David Chen appeared, grinning widely, saying his phone had already started ringing with new booking inquiries. But the most meaningful moment came when Dr. Park approached again. The conservatory director told Emma that her playing tonight had been extraordinary, that it showed maturity and depth beyond what she had displayed as a younger student. The hardships Emma had endured had given her something, valuable perspective and emotional depth that enriched her artistry. Dr. Park officially invited Emma to return to the conservatory on a full scholarship to complete her degree, with flexible scheduling that would allow her to continue performing. Emma found a quiet corner and called her father. He was still awake despite the late hour, having insisted on staying up until he heard from her. She told him about the performance, about the standing ovation, about the symphony opportunity and the scholarship offer. Her father's voice shook as he told her how proud her mother would have been, how proud he was. He said he always knew she would find her way back to music, that real talent couldn't be buried forever. The following weeks brought changes Emma could barely process. Maria Castellanos' review called her performance a revelation and the discovery of the season. The symphony orchestra officially booked her for a performance of Grieg's Piano Concerto in December. 3 more arts organizations reached out with performance opportunities, and perhaps most surprisingly, Marcus Wellington called to say that several of his business associates wanted to sponsor Emma's career, creating a fund that would support her living expenses while she completed her degree and established herself. Emma returned to the conservatory that fall, for years after she had left. Walking through those familiar hallways felt like coming home to a place she had almost forgotten existed. But she was different now. She wasn't the scared 20-year-old who had fled when life got hard. She was someone who had survived, who had learned what really mattered, who understood that success wasn't a straight line, but a winding path full of detours and obstacles. Professor Lin remained her teacher outside the conservatory, the two of them having formed a bond that went beyond student and instructor. David Chen continued as her manager, carefully building her career with performances that challenged her while not overwhelming her. James, her old co-worker from the hotel, came to every local performance, always sitting in the cheap seats but applauding the loudest. The transformation from waitress to professional pianist hadn't happened overnight, and it wasn't complete even now. Emma still had moments of doubt, performances that didn't go as well as hoped, reviews that stung. She struggled financially sometimes, even with the scholarship and sponsorship. The classical music world remained competitive and often unforgiving. But she was doing what she loved, sharing her gift with audiences who appreciated it, and perhaps more importantly, she had learned something valuable from her journey. Talent alone wasn't enough. Neither was opportunity. What mattered was persistence, the refusal to let circumstances define you, the courage to keep playing even when the audience seemed hostile or indifferent. On the 5-year anniversary of the night, Marcus Wellington had challenged her at his daughter's engagement party. Emma performed a solo recital at the city's main concert hall. The venue was sold out, every seat filled with people who had come specifically to hear her play. Her father sat in the front row, healthy now, after years of treatment. Her brother sat beside him, taking a break from his own studies at medical school. Backstage, before the performance, Emma looked at herself in the mirror. She wore an elegant concert gown, her hair professionally styled, every inch the successful performer. But she could still see traces of the exhausted waitress who had once walked past a piano with longing. She was glad that person was still there, still part of who she was. That struggle, that sacrifice, that choice to keep going, it had all led here. Emma walked onto the stage to thunderous applause, sat at the piano, and began to play. Not for money or fame or critical approval, though those things were nice. She played because music was her language, her truth, the thing that made her most fully herself. And in that moment, sharing beauty with a room full of strangers who had become listeners, Emma understood that she had never really stopped being a musician. She had only stopped believing she deserved to be one. The journey from waitress to pianist hadn't been about changing who she was. It had been about recognizing who she had always been, and finding the courage to claim it. And as her fingers flew across the keys, telling stories without words, Emma knew she was finally home.